Well, contrary to what you may have heard, I wasn't born yet. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. It was a satellite that circled the earth. They were the first ones to ever do anything like that. It was about the size of a beach ball. It doesn't seem to be that threatening now, but back then, the American psyche was deeply damaged by it. Americans just did not do well knowing that the Russians were flying something overhead. We felt violated. We felt unsafe. It was called the Great Space Race back then. The Soviet Union and America was in this race for space. Although the Soviets, they were winning in every way you can imagine. They beat us to having a working rocket. They beat us to space. They beat us to having the first man in space. President Kennedy then announced, hey, there's going to be a new course for us. We go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And those words really resonated with Americans. It was a move to reclaim space. It was a moon. For America, it focused us on the moon. Let's go there. Let's try to claim that before anybody else claims it, and both countries were racing to get there. How many millions of things had to go right for that to even take place or to even happen? This was my whole childhood, by the way, of the great space race, watching rockets go off. At the beginning of all of that, it was what was called the Mercury program. The Mercury program was first to just get one man up into space and to bring him down safely. And so we had the whole Mercury program for a while. And then it changed to the Gemini program. And that was testing man's ability to be in space for a long time. And that took 2 astronauts up and down. And then finally it was the Apollo program. And the Apollo program took 3 astronauts. And that's what took us to the moon and back. 10 years from when the time President Kennedy challenged America to the moon landing, it was a race, and it was a race that we won. I share all that with you because today God puts us in a race, which is just so curious how often God uses terminology like that. Today's our last sermon in our summer series, What Faith Looks Like. Today, God reminds us that we're in this race together. You're in a race today. Hebrews was written to a people who were considering giving up on their faith. People who were beaten and they felt beaten. People who were discouraged. In fact, the Hebrew people were even beginning to wonder, does this Christian thing even amount? Does this help? And so there was a push among the Hebrews. Maybe we should go back to the old ways. Maybe we should get back to the old Jewish ways of life. And so they were considering walking away from their faith. And that's why the book of Hebrews is written, to challenge us. Don't walk away. Don't throw in the towel. Stick in there. What you're trying to accomplish is important. So as we've been looking at Hebrews 11, which Hebrews 11 has been all these great people of faith, this passage actually, and I didn't start it this way, this passage actually begins at the end of chapter 10, and it actually concludes at the beginning of chapter 12. Those 2 pieces add a great deal to what God is doing in Hebrews 11. Just for a moment, let me show you. So in Hebrews chapter 10, starting with verse 38, God says, my righteous one will live by faith. I take no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and then are saved. This is God once again saying, don't walk away. There are those who will shrink back from their faith, but don't let that be you. And then God goes into Hebrews 11, which is person after person. Look at these people who didn't shrink back. They didn't pull back from their faith. They stayed in the game. They finished their race. And it's such a great list of heroes that you and I, we know really well. Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah. There's Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Joshua, Rahab, Gideon, David, Daniel, etc., etc. They all ran their race. They all finished what they started. And so God says, there are those who want to shrink back. Don't let that be you. Here's people who They kept in the game, and it paid off big for them. And then God throws a therefore at us. Therefore, he says. Now, this is the beginning of chapter 12. This is the punctuation mark on everything he's been saying up to this point. Chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. All right. Funerals use that passage a lot. And I've heard it said. In fact, earlier days, before I understood the passage earlier days, I may have even said it. You know, there's this great cloud of witnesses. You should picture a stadium, and their time on the field has come to an end. They're now sitting as spectators, and they're watching you run your race, and they're cheering you. They want you to do well in your, and this really preaches well in a funeral. You hear it all the time. Oh, your loved one is now watching down on you. And for some of us, we were comforted by that until you really start to take that to the end of the argument. Really, is my dad watching me? Could it be heaven? Could it be bliss? Could it be full of joy if he's watching me struggle in any way, shape, or form? Probably not. And in fact, nowhere else in Scripture is it ever implied that anyone who has passed and gone on into heaven, your loved ones are watching you. And so that's probably not the best interpretation of that passage. So what does it mean, this great cloud of witness? So God has just given us this cloud of witness. Here's a large group of people who kept their faith. They did not shrink back. They didn't pull back from their faith. They never threw in the towel. They kept their faith. And now the benefits of their daily faith is paying off big. Your faith today pays off huge tomorrow. And there's all these people who would give testimony to that. They'd give witness to that. That's probably what this passage means. That's not to say you don't have loved ones in that great cloud of witnesses. You probably do. But are they watching you day after day? Probably not. No, this is your race to run. And God has given you everything you need to finish this race. He's given you his Son. He's given you his Spirit. He's given you his Word. And it would be nice to think that Dad is up there cheering me, but I don't want Dad to watch me struggle. So he's just a witness that, Ron, your faith will pay off one day. It paid off for me. Son, it will pay off for you. That's probably what that means. But then, oh my goodness, then the Hebrew writer uses a little 3-letter word that we don't hear in media ever. The word sin. Unless you're tuned into a church program, you never hear that word anymore. It's been removed from our dialogue. And here, I love the definition that the Hebrew writer gives. Sin is something that easily entangles us. It trips up our race. It hinders what we're trying to accomplish. And here the Hebrew writer says, man, you got to get rid of that stuff. Why are you carrying that? So it's getting cooler now in the mornings. And some mornings it's cool enough. I'm going to go running, but I'm not sure what I'm going to wear. Do I wear a T-shirt? Is it a T-shirt morning? Is it a pullover morning? Do I need more? And then the Boy Scout in me overdresses, and I say, I'll wear both. And then I got a water bottle, and I got my cell phone, I got the keys to the house, got my iPod music on, and I look more like a pack mule than any kind of great runner. And within a very short time, I take off, and before I hit the county road, I know, oh, you're wearing too much. And I pull off the pullover, and I leave it by the side of the road, and I run a little further, and I drop that water bottle. I don't need to carry it. And sometimes through life, we get to carrying too much. Listen, if I could put this in my own words, this is what I'd tell you. Learn to travel light through this world. Did you hear what? You need to travel light. You're carrying too much. And some of us in this room, we know what we're carrying. We're carrying regrets. We're carrying mistakes of the past. We're carrying memories that we can't let go. We're just carrying too much. And that stuff begins to weigh down and hinder our race. It's not good for a runner, and it's not good for your faith to carry all of that. And so I'm trying to learn to travel a little lighter in this world, and that's giving it to God and leaving it there. And that's not easy when you're in deep prayer for something. I'm praying for something. I'm praying, I want something from God. Please do this for me. But then to leave it and not, that's how my faith has been challenged lately. It's just, there's things just bothering me. And they're ministry things and personal things, and I don't have the strength to run my best race and carry all of that at the same time. Look what God does next then in chapter 12, verse 2. And let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter, or your version might say finisher of our faith. In this verse right here, this is where God puts us into a race, by the way. God uses sports analogies over and over again. The Apostle Paul uses them frequently. You're in a race, or you're running, or you're in a fight. You're a boxer. He talks about athletes who run by the rules, or athletes who compete and they do personal training. There's all these sports analogies that help us in our spiritual journey. Ladies, I know you don't understand why we watch so much sports, but it's a deeply spiritual thing for us to watch sport. I didn't think I'd really get away with that today, but I thought I'd try. The Hebrew writer here said, the race marked out for your race. You just read about all these great men and women in the Old Testament. That was their race to run. That was their calling. That's not yours. No one in this room has been called to build an ark like Noah. No one in this room has been called to lead people out of Egypt like Moses. No one in this room has been called to spend the night in the lion's den like Daniel. That was their race to run, and they did it great. But there's something that God is asking of you today. There's a race, and it's hard. But it's your race, and God is wanting you to run it. And it's not that he created it, the messes and the temptations and Satan's evil work has created the circumstance, but it is a test and a challenge of our faith for us to run it so that the next generation can see our faith. I need to run my own race in such a way that my grandkids behind me, and they can say, boy, Grandpa kept his faith through all that. Oh yeah, our race has peaks and valleys. Our race has twists and turns and hurdles and obstacles. And why would anyone join this race? It's so long, it's so daunting. Why would you want to be a part why would you want to be a Christian and enter this race? Well, for the prize, of course. The prize is amazing. I ran my first, my last, and my only 5K right here at Lincoln Christian Church a few years back, the Harvest of Talents event. And they had a 5K event. And believe it or not, I did really well, all right? I was the 20th runner to come in. Feels good about that. I medaled in my age group. Now, I know all my friends are like, hey, you were the only one in that age group, and that's not true. There was that guy with a walker, but I beat them, and I medaled, and it was such a weird thing for me. All the early sports years, I didn't get trophies. I didn't get awards. I was never the MVP. Yeah, there was something weird, even at my age, to get a medal was it just felt so good. Now, You know me, you know I'm humble. I do not display my medal at home. I don't display my medal here at work. You know me better than that. I'm actually just wearing it today is what I'm doing, so it's just a joke, relax. I don't wear it every day. I wear it to bed, but I don't wear it every day. There is a prize that we are running toward. Guess who the finish line is for your faith? It's Jesus. This whole book of Hebrews, by the way, I backed up into chapter 10. I've concluded with chapter 12. But this whole thing starts in the first few verses of Hebrews chapter 1, telling us what our finish line is. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. In the past, God spoke to our people through prophets. Now, God has spoken to us through his Son. He made everything through his Son. The Son is the heir of all things. The Son shows the glory of God. He is the perfect copy of God's nature, and he holds everything together by his powerful command. The Son made people clean from their sins, and then he sat down at the right side of God. The Hebrew writer said we keep our eyes on Jesus. We fix our eyes on, he's the finisher of our faith. He becomes our finish line. And you and I are in a race running toward him today. I got to tell you, I'm really proud of this congregation. There are days that I run and I feel good. The knee doesn't hurt. I run a little more swift, turn in a better time. When it's all done, it's a good feeling. And then there's other days I run with a limp. And it hurts, and I wonder why I'm doing it. Life sometimes, because of the circumstances you're in, some of you right today are running with a limp. And I've watched you go through so many problems. I've watched you go through marital problems, but you held your faith. I've watched you go through occupational problems, but you held your faith. I've watched you go through bad health and bad work situations and bad finances, but you held your faith. I've watched you stand at the grave of a loved one. And even though that ached, it ached so deep, you held your faith. And I couldn't be more proud to run with you, to be in a race beside you. Your faith has ministered to me. It has encouraged me. It's made me stronger. And God today is taking your faith, even when life hurts, even when you run with a limp. He's going to take your life and show it to someone else and they say, do you see that? That's what faith looks like. Yet you become the picture to someone else. Yeah, I'm even watching some of you right now. You're keeping your faith even though God is saying no to your prayers. The elders and myself have been in a series of prayer for one of the families here at the church, and an adoption issue and everything. And what we're praying for is good. What we're praying for, we're doing it with the right motives. What we're praying for would be really healthy. And God has not given us the yes we're looking for just yet. And then one of our families is just aching. And they've kept their faith. I don't know how they did it. It's not easy. But they're holding their faith. They're finishing their race. When you're waiting for something, when you're waiting for a child, or when you're waiting for an occupational change, or when you're waiting for a health change, and God is slow to bring you an answer, and you keep your faith, you are an amazing demonstration to someone around you. God uses that moment of you struggling to show someone else, this is how you do it, this is what, and you all have done that. And you are the picture of faith for your children. You are the picture of faith for your neighbors. You're the picture of faith for me. And so you know what? Today we stand stiff and strong and we say, you know what? We do not give up on our faith. We do not walk away. We don't throw in the towel. We do not shrink back. We move on. We press forward. Because the race that we're in is our race, and God is counting on us.